So welcome back to our last power tripping number 9, the complainers group. We may have a bonus power tripping or two coming down the pike, but this will be the last one that goes with the main 9 episodes of the podcast. And there's been a whole lot that's happened, a whole lot to discuss. And I think before we get into it, I think the way that I'd like to bring us into this is to just talk a little bit about some of the concerns around safety and harms and just the awareness and importance of education, harm reduction information, and sort of everything that goes with that. And I just want to highlight, because we got some correspondence when we were talking about Jen Rothman's death in the last episode, and the discussion about the med student who had written in to talk about the hyponatremia issues and how easily that could have been addressed in the appropriate setting and with appropriate medical knowledge. And so I just wanted to highlight that point, that her life, like the reality that there was a solid, straightforward chance at saving her life had she been brought to an ER or had someone called 911. And that question of the tension between people who are engaged in criminal activities, that tension between looking to cover their own asses or actually help out their fellow human beings, sort of regardless of what the potential costs to themselves might be. And I want to underscore that when we're talking about issues that go with reporting things to the police and authorities or calling for medical help, like there's plenty of stuff that indicates that you are not actually at risk of legal prosecution. And even if you are at risk of legal prosecution, if you choose to engage in criminal behaviors with friends, acquaintances, whatever, like it seems to me that there should be some acknowledgement of what you are taking on, and the idea that people's safety and lives and well-being is paramount. So I just want to highlight that dynamic, and also the idea that particularly in these spaces where people may have a bit of a woo or sort of spiritual framing around this stuff, the question
A creative
about
relationship to reality.
precisely Ferrer, and the questions about, was he seeing Jenny's convulsions as evidence of an emotional state or some sort of spiritual release. And just like in medical contexts, or in situations where there may be medical issues at play, the importance of being grounded in some sort of actual consensus reality. And this isn't limited to this case, right? Like if we talk about, there was a death at Lightning in a Bottle at the Zendo, which is sort of MAPS's harm reduction setup. And the woman who died of hyperthermia and was found in the Zendo covered in blankets, which is legitimately the opposite of what you would do in that case. And the reality is, like, there were questions about, were there trained medics or doctors on staff, and people get kind of dicey and iffy around some of these harm reduction situations, saying that, oh, we can do peer support, we don't need trained medical professionals. And having done like harm reduction work at Cosmic, go ahead.
Well, when I was engaging with Zendo around that death in particular, they're not allowed to teach. They're not allowed to specifically through Zendo. At least back then, they told me they weren't allowed to teach emergency medical training to anyone, because then that would make them liable for issues that cropped up if they screwed up their emergency medical techniques and things.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, like I having done cosmic care work at the Boom Festival, there have been some really shit situations, and we've gotten really lucky because each shift is bottom lined or anchored by somebody who has proper medical training, and usually at least one, if not two or more other people who have some basic training. And the notion that you would do this work without having people like that on staff, yeah, it just doesn't hold. And I think some of these issues are significant in the broader community in the ways that people reinterpret a lot of potentially harmful behaviors as potentially being helpful or in service to growth, or things that we've seen with some of the responses to the reporting in Power Trip, where people have been on social media saying like, maybe it's not right to get into bed with your clients if your clients are survivors of sexual trauma, but maybe in other contexts it is okay for therapists to get in bed with their clients. And I continue to be floored by some of the takes that are coming out around that. And so I thought maybe this offered, especially as MAPS has remained silent about the videos of Megan Buisson's therapy session, that the clinical trial session that we just released, this persistent inability or unwillingness to engage with the realities around these situations, whether it was Jen Rothman or Megan Buisson or any of the countless people that we have not covered in the series. It's time to get real.
In terms of the responses, like you were saying, the rationalizations that are rife in the psychedelic community, particularly, when in service to protecting one of the, organizations spearheading this movement for medicalization, the capacity for just making up any like rationalization, any solution for what is in front of people's eyes is something that is you have Megan saying what was happening to her was extremely anti-therapeutic. You can see a person in distress, but I think that we've seen so much mental gymnastics around like other practitioners doing things that are literally life-threatening, that are downright disgusting. So I guess the experience of this team is that we're all rather familiar with the lengths with to which members of the psychedelic community are willing to excuse the most egregious behavior if it's in service of furthering some psychedelic renaissance or making sure that psychedelic therapy is seen in a good light. And I think one of the things that y'all did well in one of the earlier episodes was pointing out that the rationalizations, even with the folks at MAPS themselves, is such that essentially death is the limit in terms of what is acceptable. So, yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, and I think that point about death being where people draw the line, or like one of the things I've really grappled with since before the podcast, but especially during the podcast, has been this question of, we've heard a lot of people talk about medicalization as a Trojan horse. And I've grappled a lot with this question of like, why does it seem so hard to get engagement with these real and serious issues that are coming out of psychedelic medicalization? And why does it seem like not just that people don't care and people don't want to hear it, but that people actively push back and silence and seek to delegitimize the importance of these conversations? And one of the ideas I've kicked around for a while is this question of like, maybe it's because they're serious about psychedelic medicalization being a Trojan horse for some sort of legalization or access to drugs. And so like, I don't know that it's the quote right reason. I don't know that I'm right with this analysis, but there's this thing where it's like, okay, if psychedelic medicalization is a Trojan horse, then it certainly simplifies or makes sense, like the fact that nobody cares, because if it's just there as a Trojan horse, if it's just a vehicle to secure some sort of legally accessible psychedelics or MDMA or whatever, then like, yeah, who gives a shit what happens to clinical trial participants? Who gives a shit, like, how many people get hurt or what the collateral damage is? At that point, it becomes easier to mask that fundamental question of, if people are going to talk about collateral damage, how much collateral damage are they saying is acceptable? And does that math change if the people that we're talking about as collateral damage are their friends, their family, people they care about, people they love? Because, like, I don't know, I'm not willing to write off people in my life as collateral damage. I'm not willing to call them into a setup or a system that has shown such disregard for people's well-being and safety. And the fact that it seems so hard to even get basic engagement or acknowledgement of the harms that have happened, not even like, even from people who, like, sure, say it wasn't your trial, it wasn't your responsibility, but like, certainly we can acknowledge that this shouldn't have happened. And I don't get that.
It's not just
I'm always kind of. Oh, sorry. Go on, Pace.
I just, please, somebody else say something.
Well, I was just going to say that it's a criticism that we have received for our reporting in the past, but it's definitely something I've seen crop up around Power Trip, that the kind of unwillingness or the constant refrain of like, oh, you didn't include any good stories in here, or are you writing off all the good stories? And it seems like plenty of people are willing to like level that criticism, but they seem perfectly willing to write off these bad stories of collateral damage, or like kind of like they would prefer that those weren't talked about at all, or if they were talked about, that they were countered out with like a good story. And it's like,
it's a little bit like news articles about car crashes. News articles about car crashes don't usually have a bunch of comments about how, but cars are important and they take us lots of places, and like there's a lot of good about cars, but like sometimes these crashes happen. It's like, no, like you talk about the thing that happened, and sometimes the infrastructure of the roads are changed in order to reduce that thing from happening if it keeps happening at that intersection or at that bend or whatever. Like there are changes that can be made so that it doesn't keep happening. I do think as well, like there's
That's
something
a real quick, sorry, just also literally Google psychedelic research or psychedelic clinical trials and like see how many negative stories you find. Like the notion that somehow our reporting is unbalanced. Like maybe if you look at it in a vacuum on its only like in isolation, but like if you put that into the broader mix, it doesn't even begin to balance things out. Sorry, Lily.
Yeah, something I think about a lot is how often people in the psychedelic space will talk about like, we need to keep moving this movement forward because this is gonna transform people and get them to like get humanity to a place where it can address all these crises that face us and so on and so forth. And it's like, let's pause and think about this for a moment. One, there's really great points that have been made by many members of this team, including Pace and Nishay, who have, written about psychedelics and political pluripotency. So people don't always transform in the ways that will lead to a certain liberal imagining of a better future. But also, if they did, like, that's sketchy to me. The idea that like I want more people to have this experience so that they are transformed and come to share the views I have about the world that we should all live in and we can all work together for that. Like that just sounds like some mass cult brainwashing shit to me.
Yep.
I think it's really quite suspect. And I don't understand why people just continue to think that like there's all kinds of issues with positing individual solutions to social and systemic problems and like that sort of thing. But it's also just like, hey, like people get to have their autonomy. And if you're setting out to transform people's political beliefs and actions and value systems from the outset and believe that psychedelics are a tool to do that, what that tells me is that you want coercive control over people's beliefs. And like, that's not a world I want to live in.
Yeah, generally speaking,
Just last
even
we
if
were
it were
watching-
true,
Oh,
even if it just real quick, even if it were true,
Mhm.
even if it were the case that psychedelics were a magic pill that made people better, made us love each other and sing kumbaya around the fire, it would still be wrong to do one's best to trick everybody into taking it because you wanted to change their worldview.
yeah. I just what?
Yeah, I was just going to point out too that we were just watching a talk that Rick Doblin was giving last night where he said that he hopes that MDMA and psychedelic research will get us to a global spirituality by 2070. And that's kind of what was running through my mind as you were talking about that, Lily, about that kind of hegemonic
He's been
spiritual belief.
He's been
I mean,
saying that
that's
sort of thing since the 80s.
Yeah, and I mean, hell, there's a talk he gave 5-6 years ago where the abstract for the talk talks about how how psychedelics and psychedelic medicalization are going to usher in a spirituality for the billions or whatever. Like, I mean,
he made similar comments much more recently on the Marianne Williamson podcast. Like,
yep.
these are the this is what a person with a messiah complex says. In my
No,
opinion.
no,
Yeah.
it wasn't a messiah complex. He was visited by someone when he was on ketamine and had a dream, and he's this. Sorry. But actually, speaking of that Doblin talk, we can listen to Doblin in his own words because I think his engagement with these issues, or should I say his non-engagement with these issues, actually paints, I think, some of the responses that we've seen over the last few days, and I think responses that we've all encountered, shall I say, archetypally, to borrow from the Jungians that seem to litter this community, over years as we've tried to get attention to these issues. So just yell, scream, stop.
What kind of thoughts or feedback do you have
Sorry.
about that?
Yeah, and this is him responding to some of the issues raised in Cover Story. And I feel like just to put in context his response, you guys put out like 9 hours worth of reporting and plus all the power tripping, which is probably another 9 hours or so. And this is like Rick's response to the information that has come out.
So here we go.
What kind of thoughts or feedback do you have about that, Rick?
Yeah. Well, so we've had around 365 patients that we have treated. In one instance, at least that's the only one we're aware of, one of the therapists engaged in a sexual relationship with a patient, which is completely unethical. We do have rules
Do you want to
against
stop
that.
real quick?
I do, because
It's not
that's
just-
not. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. I just wanted to stop there because it's not a sexual relationship between a therapist and a patient with that vast power differential. It's not just unethical. It's a lot of things, but it's not a sexual relationship. It's sexual misconduct. It's exploitation,
Abuse, assault.
assault.
Yeah. And there is that, this is the only one that they know of, is what he says. And we'll get a little bit more into questions of like the videotapes and who saw that and what Maps has said at different points, but like maybe it's the only one that they know of, or it certainly raises questions about what they know of and what they're aware of, if they haven't actually viewed the tapes from their different therapy sessions and what has gone on. And this is a point that MAPS and other organizations have hammered on for years, that the reason people are safe and the reason things can't happen is because these sessions are recorded. And Lars Wild from Compass, sorry, I should say formerly from Compass, has said that, the way that you knew people would be safe in Compass trials because they were being videotaped. And MAPS has given us more than 5 different answers about who watched the tapes and at what point. everything from nobody saw it to, oh yes, like the adherence was done just the way that always happens. And so like there's huge questions around that particular component, and identifying it as a sexual relationship as they have consistently done for years is just wrong. Like that's not up for debate. All right.
Patient Bill of Rights. We're trying to do more to prevent that from happening, but it has happened, and so we're condemning that. We're not working with those researchers anymore. The idea of whether the CAPS-5 reflects the lived experience of the patients, it's designed to do that. It's an hour-long interview. It's used, we have a very robust system of independent raters. I think in cover story, there was some patient that said that she made it seem like her results were better than they really were in order to please the researchers. I suppose that could have happened. There are internal checks within the CAPS to sort of see if people are.
I'm curious what you think of that response, because that's a lot of times I feel like when Rick and MAPS receive criticism, they say something along the lines of, well, yeah, that could have happened.
I mean, it sounds like there's problems with their trial design. Like
this is also an acknowledged problem in research right now as well. It's not like I guess it could have happened. It's understood that this does occur in research.
I'd also say that like earlier in this comment, there's a very like cutting ties, washing of hands kind of discussion of Jensen and Dreyer. Oh, we're not working with those researchers anymore.
Right.
I think Dreyer still has a license. Richard Jensen lost his, and it wasn't a problem for his inclusion.
Lost his license before coming into the trial. Yep.
So I mean, at what point do they say, wow, these researchers transgressed in a way that destabilized our entire project, and now we're making sure that they never do it to anyone ever again? Like, that's absent from this discussion.
Or even like a recognition that for this to occur across multiple sessions over several months took multiple system failures.
Yeah.
And so it is not just the problem of two therapists. This is the problem of multiple systems. And I would like an accounting for exactly what went wrong.
You know what the issue is? Sorry.
Oh, it's just, I was going to say like exactly what went wrong and exactly how it's going to be corrected.
Their degree of just like accountability and like accepting responsibility and it is lacking, and the defensiveness is constant.
It's non-existent. Like I just want to point out, adherence isn't an optional thing. Like, adherence was written in their protocol. When they got this protocol approved by the IRB, when they engaged in research that was being conducted under the auspices of the FDA, they had made a promise to their research participants. And they just, like, in at least some of the lines that they've given us, they just didn't do it. Or they did it and they thought that the things on that video were fine. As some people have said online, there have been, thankfully, fortunately, they've been in the minority, but like the number of people who have come out to say, oh, I don't see a problem there. That doesn't look abhorrent to me or whatever. Like this could be therapy for sure. It has not been zero. And I think like the willingness to excuse, and I just want to point out like I have had people, and this is not to shade them, this is about my own frustration. I have had people who have said, seeing it on video compared to even hearing the audio clips or hearing the descriptions, like that's what it took to drive it home for them to understand how bad it was. And like it is so depressing to me that not only did it have to come to Megan choosing to release medical records, essentially, like footage of her experiences in a clinical trial, but also that like despite that, even in spite of that, there are still people for whom it's not enough. And like the amount of resistance that there has been to acknowledging it, and the fact that I mean, this interview that we're watching right now, this clip came from literally, this is yesterday. The videos
Right.
have been out and circulating for a couple days, and like I just, talking to survivors of different assaults over the years and knowing how many of them, having a sense of what some of them would give to be able to have documentation like this, and seeing that even with this documentation, in many ways, it is still an uphill battle, is just fucking enraging.
I would also say that, like, you know, the response to the framing or the tone or that Symposia generally is aggressive in reporting on these issues, that, you know, we should be dismissed as a result. The courage that Megan showed, and that you all spent time devoting to how long she's been fighting to be heard. This Megan's account was out several years before Power Trip ever came to light, and it didn't land. It didn't get the attention of anyone, and so this is what it took. So the idea that this is aggressive is ridiculous. This is what it took.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Maps
this
put out a
aggressive,
statement.
this quote unquote aggressive reporting is what it took for them to launch this investigation into what happened. Like, this has been, when was the other story on this? Back in 2019?
Yeah,
Early
but the
2020.
early 2020, but the trials were 2015, and this trial,
Right.
her trial, was 2015, and it was supposed to have been recorded. And Maps put out a statement in 2019 saying that they were aware of the ethical violations, but that somehow Dreyer hadn't been aware until later, or whatever, and that their review of study records showed no ethical violations. And so, like, Maps, like the narratives that they have been running around this seem to be pure interference and disinformation, and
Right. It took them
It's just like
over
very
half a decade
standard-
to launch an investigation.
It's a very
crazy.
standard corporate public relations.
well, Maps is a pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, it's a very
but
standard like response that they're giving. It doesn't surprise me. Maps is obsessed with public relations. They're obsessed with
Sure.
it. They will ignore everything until it reaches a certain level where they have to address it. This is
The
this
gap
is a
between the rhetoric.
pattern that this organization has had for years.
Mhm.
They try to take care of things. They don't address things. There's multiple issues that me personally involved with them over the years, and looking back at their historical record, so much of this, I think, is just driven by Doblin has sort of like imbued this organization with a certain brand of his like consequentialism, where like this is the philosophy at Maps, in my opinion, starts from the head down. I'm sure there's a lot of people there who think that this is horrible, but he kind of, I don't know. I'm not going to get into all my thoughts on it. It's so unsurprising to me, their public relations response. It's so unsurprising.
Shall we continue?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
For being honest and accurate. We can only deal with the information that we're given. The CAPS is the most important, or the only, really, it's the gold standard required by FDA and EMA and other regulatory agencies around the world. It's a difficult situation. We do work with the hardest patients. And I think the problems that I heard of in the first story were from patients who felt that the 3 sessions was not enough, and they
Okay, I'm going to pause it right there. Or actually, here, we can
Yes.
let Rick go on a little bit about how it's not enough.
wanted more sessions. And in all the cases, actually, people felt that the therapy ended too abruptly. That's the way that protocols are run. I mean, we must do that. But post-approval, people can get more sessions is if they need them.
So there's a couple things.
So is
there.
that going to
First,
be his spin on it? Is like, oh well, the issue
You
was
just
that
need
there
more.
wasn't enough, so
you
we
got
need
traumatized
more.
in your trauma therapy. Here, let's dose you again. So there's a couple things. One, Rick is aware that the FDA is going to put a cap on lifetime number of MDMA sessions. So my question is, what happens if they approve 5 sessions or 7 or 9 sessions or however many it ends up being? And what if that's not enough? There is an implicit acknowledgement that you are going to then be sending people into the underground. And we've seen what can happen in the underground. Like, we've seen some of the sketchy things that have been normalized by practitioners, including practitioners that MAPS has endorsed, promoted, fiscally sponsored, in the case of the Center for Consciousness Medicine, Francoise Borzat's group. And like this notion that like we can't do anything about people, who have these experiences, or that they're not being honest. Like, in the case of Leia, she was explicit again and again and again, and the amount of material that, like, we've seen therapist notes, we've seen emails. I sat in on informed consent meetings about the long-term follow-ups. Like, the amount of stuff that was not included on the scientific record that had nothing to do with participants not being accurate and everything to do with MAPS researchers being unwilling and unable to listen and engage and record what they were being told. The number of times where MAPS researchers have decided to insert their own narratives about what's going on, whether it's that, oh, things get better before they get worse before they get better, trust the process, this is just how it unfolds, this is your attachment trauma.
This is just part of your healing journey.
Like, I'm sorry, that's a choice.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting kind of cop out to be like, well, this is the way research has to be done. If you've designed a research protocol and participants are telling you this protocol, which is a novel drug plus therapy protocol that the FDA is not familiar with regulating, and people are saying that this is not sufficient, and they're going on to say, oh, and by not sufficient, I mean I'm experiencing ongoing and serious desire to end my life. That is a signal that I don't understand the willingness to just kind of throw their it seems to me he's throwing his hands up and saying, well, it's the best that we can do. It's like, no, that's not good enough. And there are a lot of experts we've talked to who have told us all of the ways that is not good enough, and all of the ways that could be corrected and amended in an ethical research protocol.
And when we've shown the MAPS protocols to people, they have been quite surprised what the IRB approved. And when we talked to the head of MAPS training, she was apparently unaware that the therapist manual allowed for different elements of 13 different, quote, healing modalities or whatever. Sorry, that probably shouldn't quote that. But supposed healing modalities, including things like holotropic breath work, that these things may arise spontaneously in session. Like, at the point where your head of training doesn't seem to be aware of what's going on in the therapy, like it is a black box. And the notion that is just the way that it has to be, I'm sorry, I can't accept that. And if you can't go back, yeah, go ahead.
I would just say that some of this, like, we have to sort of recontextualize this, or rather historicize this, because, Richard Jensen and Doblin go way back, like way, way, way back. And by including all of these modalities, and also by not requiring everybody to be a clinician, I know that the bringing along of the underground has been a MAPS goal.
Yep.
And so they're trying to cast, a very wide umbrella to bring along underground practitioners. And so they said, how many modalities, how many schools of thought can we, let skate by, considering that FDA doesn't know what is going on here? And right there is all of the Roquette modalities, if that's what we want to call them. But also just a bunch of woo as well. I mean, it's not like I don't want to like disparage therapy that people have found helpful, but when we're talking about scale, it matters. And there's just dual alliances here, because the idea of medicalizing psychedelic therapy is it's a spiritual movement as much as it is a medical project at this point.
And Doblin's been explicit about that repeatedly.
Yes.
So
I think that's my basic response to the issues that were raised there.
Thanks, Rick. Itamar, do you have any others in the chat?
I see Grace is putting in the chat, maps.org/safety. We are committed to trying to provide as safe an environment as possible for the patients. It's the essence of therapy is creating a safe space. And so that's something that we hold very highly, and we're doing whatever we can to do that. And we also have various information at the FAQ about more specific responses to some of the things that were said.
So I want to point out that the FAQ that MAPS has put up contains a bunch of misleading and inaccurate information. For example, like in Power Trip, we discussed the number of participants involved in phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials for PTSD, but for some reason, rather than engaging with that, MAPS is putting out the number of people that they've given MDMA to across the board. Weird sort of substitutions and sidesteps like that. But then also they refer people back to their 2019 statement about Megan Buisson's trials, in which they say that study records did not show ethical violations. And so it's like seeing this level of disingenuous engagement, or engagement that I don't know how to describe if not as disingenuous, like certainly even if they didn't do a compliance review until 2021, they've now told us that there were things on there that didn't fit the protocol. So why are they still referring to a statement that says there were no ethical violations? Like, you have both therapists in bed. You have a towel being shoved into the participant's mouth. You have Richard Jensen holding her wrists as he's wrestling with her. I mean, the fact that these videos came out, and like Rick, and to be clear, Rick didn't engage with the videos, and neither did the moderator. So this was a conversation at University of Alabama, Birmingham. I believe at least one of the moderators has now made his Twitter profile private because of conversations that took place in the wake of that, of Rick Doblin's appearance, and people being upset at their acritical platforming of him. So they had the chat turned off for that event, so there was no like public conversation happening while Rick was talking. You could only message the moderator. So I messaged both moderators and asked why there was this contradiction between Maps's statement saying there were no ethical violations and what is clearly visible on that footage. Neither of them engaged or forwarded the question on. I asked Rick directly because those were the only three people who you could ask, and none of them engaged. So this approach seems to be where MAPS is currently at, pretending that there's nothing to see here and everything is normal and fine as it's always been.
And they're that 2019 response that you'd mentioned, that they're kind of referring people back to. I've seen people in discussion about Megan's story referring to that as why MAPS is kind of in the right. And it's like, so like it's 2022 and they're referring to this thing that has factual inaccuracies And that's actually swaying people's opinion to think that MAPS is okay in some scenarios and that it wasn't really on them, when it's not factually accurate. And it's just kind of disheartening to watch happen.
People seem to think that the reporting that Dave and Lily and the team at New York Mag, with the help of actual participants in MDMA therapy and underground therapy, that this long project of multiple professionals, that somehow you're just mistaken, that the quality, that the slant doesn't capture the real picture. But like the reality is, even if you think that, like there's a lot of inconsistent criticisms. So if Power Trip and or Symposia is just focusing on negative stories, well, when you focus, things become quite clear. Maybe you miss the broader picture, but you should probably have a pretty good view of what that is, right? No one debates the accuracy because they can't. They haven't done the work. And we're not seeing it with Doblin's response either. The lack of engagement with what y'all have put on the table is because it cannot be dealt with on those terms.
Yeah, I think something I've been thinking a bit about is like the critique that we've been aggressive in our tone in ways that make it difficult to engage with us. A lot of people who've been hurt have not indicated that they find anything about engaging with us to be difficult. So that's one litmus test, the ones that we've spoken to anyway. But the other thing I think that's worth thinking about is that I've been trying, I tried to have this conversation in this space even before the Amazon, from 2011 until 2014. And the response to my having been sexually assaulted by a very dangerous man and trying to get engagement around the fact that there are shamans and practitioners who sexually abuse people was met with silencing tactics and flipping it around to, I had called this in as a growth opportunity and, chose to put myself in this situation. I mean, it was victim blame top to bottom, and it was reframed as personal growth, which upon doing later research was like, oh, lots of people are getting this kind of story. And I made an effort to engage a number of prominent figures in psychedelics in trying to address these issues internally. And I was met with blame or ignoring the issue. And I think for me, it's like, I did the best I could to engage within the space around this. And the consequence was so detrimental to me that I left the space entirely. I thought for good. And it was when I saw a bigger picture and started to understand the potential harms coming down the pike as these things are medicalized and scaled up that I, and great thanks to Dave for helping me to see that and understand that. And of course, to the sources who kind of came out of the woodwork. But I think it's just an interesting thing to be like, this is a very aggressive tactic. It's like, this is really confronting material. What has been done to these victims is really confronting material. And, we've dedicated a lot of time to handling those stories as carefully as we can. I wonder sometimes if what people find aggressive is just the fact that we're not going about this first and foremost in a way that's trying to protect a movement. But the core
movement
issue
in its
is that,
current form with its current leaders, right?
yeah, I mean, the baseline is that over and over again, we're seeing examples of a movement that claims to be about healing people, but continues to act as though human beings are expendable and collateral damage. and ends justify the means. And that is not a movement I am willing to participate in or associate with or endorse or support. I think that those dynamics, we just have to keep identifying those issues and doing what we can to tell these marginalized stories so that people can really understand what's going on.
I also just want to say that, like, sorry, Pace, did you want to jump in with something?
Just real quick, there's something that I wanted to just mention about aggression and about how y'all framed this last episode that I was really impressed with, which was that, you know, these participants, Megan and Mel, they expressed how they weren't against the drugs, how they wanted to tell their stories so that it didn't happen to somebody else, like to tell these stories forcefully in this way, to push, to complain, to be loud about it, is in service of making sure it doesn't happen again. And I just and Lily, that's what you've been doing for years, or at least like that's what you're doing now that you're here again.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, like, none of us want to be doing this work. These victims and the people who've been hurt, like, the cost of speaking out is tremendous. You know, like everybody would prefer that none of this had ever happened. Or better still, not better still, the best scenario is that it had never happened. Or if it did happen, that it had been responded to appropriately, and that this kind of effort to tell these stories wasn't necessary. You know, I left the space. I got a PhD looking at social responses to sexual violence and was very happily making a career for myself in the sexual violence prevention and response space, doing work with communities and doing work on the ground and doing work at the government policy level and in research. Like, you know, it's not like, you know, nothing about this was like a careerist enterprise. This was a sense of, at the end of the day, being able to sleep at night and die in peace, hopefully many years down the track, knowing that I saw something because these people had the courage to come forward and talk about what they had been through, whether it was in clinical trials or in the underground. You know, Dave and I and the Psymposia team and a collective of us saw the writing on the wall, and we did everything we could to make sure that the public and the regulators were aware of it, to try to prevent it from happening and try to improve any systems that might be put into place to respond well when it does happen. That's all this is.
I just want to say, like, I was a lone weirdo out in North Carolina, drug nerd, interested in radical politics. And the first person who invited me to engage in any sort of like public facing psychedelia, it was a queer indigenous female scholar who decided and did the labor with a team to host the first conference at an Ivy League institution engaging with psychedelia in God knows how long. And that was Nishay. Following that 2012 conference, Psychedemia, I watched David J. Brown bully her on Facebook when she was working with a collective of young women on a DMT book project that I had gotten roped into. She was pregnant at the time. And I couldn't believe it because it was on Facebook. Like, people could see what was happening. I still have some of the conversations in my email. The pictures are all fucked up because I copied and pasted. But like, I went back and read through it. I don't know, I want to say within the last year or so, it had come up in another conversation, and just like my first experiences with like actual public psychedelia, like the mainstream MAPS crowd, whatever, it was just like, how the fuck, like I had looked up to so many, I didn't know David, but I had looked up to so many people in that sphere, and had started getting, you know, I didn't use Facebook at the time. I had an account that was set up, and people started friending me, and seeing the things that like, you know, it was the beginning of that whole facade starting to crumble. And then in 2014, getting invited to the Boom Festival and seeing behavior that I thought was entirely inappropriate from who I had fucking looked up to, because I thought was one of, I thought it was a phenomenal film, and I have never said his name before about the things that I saw and heard around that event. And for me, like those two as some of like the first sort of, I mean, and there were like a bunch of little things at the MAPS 2013 Oakland event that I found disturbing and concerning, and I won't run through them all here, but like those were my three. It was 2012 Psychedemia, 2013 Psychedelic Science in Oakland, 2014 Boom Conference, Boom Festival in Portugal, and being invited back into some of the speaker spaces, into some of the VIP areas, seeing the things that people were comfortable engaging in. I saw it and I was horrified, and I said, I'm just going to shut the fuck up and keep an eye on this. And I had no clue where it was going to go. I had no clue what was going to happen. And I just want to say, like some of the people that I looked up to so much in this field as a lone weirdo, sort of in the woods out in North Carolina, like I have seen so many of my heroes disappoint me in so many ways. And it has been fucking hard. And to see the responses that are going down now, even in the face of releasing these videos, the fact that MAPS hasn't engaged with them, the fact that, and maybe this is a good transition into what happened with MAPS Canada when we showed up yesterday as well. The fact that you can't even get people to say, these are things that should not be happening, and this is fucked up, and we're sorry that it happened, and we will do whatever we can in our power to prevent them from ever happening again. Like, I don't understand why it's so hard.
Here.
So without further ado, here is Scott Bernstein of MAPS Canada.
He's the executive director.
We have published some articles on him. We can throw them into the show notes. I guess he threatened to dox a source who had shared information about the former executive director of MAPS Canada engaging in basically taking the entire email list from the nonprofit to a for-profit company he had moved to. But in this moment, I had asked Scott a question about the videos, and
Yeah.
here I will switch over. Let's see, get him as the, sorry, Lily. There we go. And so the question reads, video has emerged showing MAPS therapists assaulting a clinical trial participant in a phase 2 trial in BC, that's British Columbia. MAPS claimed trial record showed no ethical violations. Can you please explain the contradiction between MAPS's prior statements and the videos that have come to light? What has MAPS Canada done to ensure the safety of future Canadian participants in MAPS clinical trials? I understand there will be some ongoing Canadian trials. And then it links to Hannah Rosen's article in The Cut entitled, You Won't Feel High After Watching This Video. And we can throw that in the show notes as well. So here is Scott's response.
Okay. I'm
gonna tackle this first question here. So yeah, so I'm going to give you a lawyer answer to this, unfortunately, because the answer is going to be that one, because I am a lawyer. So MAPS Canada is a different organization than MAPS US or MAPS Public Benefit Corp. And MAPS Canada was not a delegate or a sponsor or an investigator in any of the MAPS clinical trials. So our role in those trials was different. We helped to facilitate funding for these, but we had absolutely no role in oversight or accountability of any of the therapy that was done. Okay, I'm sorry. So the question, okay, sure. So the question is, videos emerged showing MAPS therapists assaulting a clinical trial participant in a phase 2 trial in BC. MAPS claimed trial records showed ethical violations. Oh yeah, thank you, Daniel, for posting. I want to say that we're a separate organization. I think MAPS US can speak for itself as the sponsor of the clinical trials. As an organization, we support ethical clinical practice. We support following of rules and oversight for clinical therapy. So I think I'm not going to say too much about this because I think it's really not our particular role to comment on someone else's clinical trial, and I'm not an ethicist or a clinical researcher.
I'm just going to pause it there because like the notion that you can't comment on this, the notion that you can't even offer a fucking comment because you're not an ethicist or a clinician, like your organization, what he said helped fund, but like clearly wasn't accountable. Like, yeah, no shit.
I think as the answer there is apparent to everybody. It's so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a non-answer. Let's just be clear.
Shall we?
I mean,
you want to let it play out as a non-answer, or
yeah, sure.
Yeah, let it finish.
Or a psychologist to talk about those boundaries, but I just want to say that I think it's in all of our interest to ensure that I think it's in all of our interest to ensure that there's a safe and positive environment for psychedelic therapy. And so it's terrible when things happen that violate ethics and rules in any circumstance, whether that's in the circumstance of a clinical trial or it's a circumstance of underground practice. And so I think we as a whole should ensure that there's mechanisms that provide accountability and safety for participants, and we have accountability for those participating. Okay, so I think I'm going to move on to the next question. So
I think that's where it ends. Yep.
There's this
things happen.
There's also this, whenever asked about things that have happened in MAPS trials, MAPS Canada always falls back on, we're two separate organizations, whatever. I just wanted to read a quick thing that Mark Hayden, who helped found MAPS Canada, said at one of their general community meetings, which was that, quote, MAPS Canada is essentially a branch of the American MAPS, MAPS USA. On the basic and most fundamental level, the reason that MAPS Canada exists is so that Canadians can write checks to an organization and get a Canadian tax credit and they can support psychedelic research in Canada as a result because the Americans can't do that. Rick Doblin cannot start a Canadian organization that allows tax receipts because he is an American. So every time it truly is just a lawyer response. That's all it is. It's just like spin. It's not.
They are the same organization except as legal.
Not for tax purposes.
Maps, I don't know her. I hope she's doing well and everything's okay though.
We only have the same name, but
and we feed them money.
Right.
Just the trials, not the organization, just the trials that they're sponsoring.
I think one of the things that I thought when the first time I saw that was like, how hard is it to condemn what's in those videos? Like, why is it so hard?
It could be hard if there's more videos.
Yeah.
I just feel like MAPS is a large organization with a lot of money, and I think power should be held accountable. And in this instance, I would appreciate a thorough accounting of everything that went wrong, everything that has gone wrong, and every step being taken to ensure that nothing goes wrong again.
The fact that they can't what are they as an organization doing to ensure Canadian trial participants like the notion that they because that whole session they talk about all the things that they're doing for the community and this, that, and the other, and the fact that he can't okay, fine, he's not MAPS, he's not the sponsor organization, but surely they care about people in their community who might be coming into these trials. Surely they give a shit about what people might face. No, and if that's the case, I literally the question was, what are you doing to help ensure Canadians who may participate in future clinical trials?
Doing nothing. The former executive director was selling a book on MAPS Canada's website that was edited, published, and co-authored by Martin Ball, aimed at guides. These are human beings giving vulnerable people drugs. Martin Ball had a book on their website. They don't care.
That advocated, right? That was teaching or advocating for people. Go ahead.
To be clear, we're talking about the Manual for Psychedelic Guides that was written by Mark Hayden, the former executive director of MAPS Canada. And this guide itself was published, edited, and the foreword for which was written by Martin Ball, a guy on camera who doesn't admit, boasts about throwing up on multiple clients, about extremely dangerous practices in life-threatening
who has no
situations.
training whatsoever, who admits to making it up as he goes along.
And who committed essentially the same thing, framed as advice for practitioners of his non-dual energetic therapy with 5-MeO-DMT, a modality that I am glad is not included in the MAPS protocols as one that can spontaneously arise during a session.
It could perhaps make its way in there if one of the practitioners decided that they wanted to have creative latitude. Perhaps non-dual entheogenic therapy could make its way into one of their studies.
Well, it could, because the dang book was recommended as suggested reading in Mark Hayden's guide. This is the level of crazy we're dealing with.
Yep.
It's wild. It's wild.
And we're the aggressive ones for being alarmed about this.
MAPS Canada is a completely incompetent organization. Full stop. I knew back in 2014, 2015, someone sent me something about Martin Ball. Maybe it took me maybe a second and a half, I don't know, maybe instantaneously in my brain, where I saw Martin Ball's website. And I was like, nope, charlatan. This guy's fucked up.
eagle flying
Maps Canada,
over.
the directive executive for Maps Canada has a manual that is designed for naive guides to give drugs that has this guy's involvement all over it. This is the supposedly the most trusted name in psychedelics. They're an incompetent organization. They've been run by incompetent people. Mark Hayden is an incompetent executive. He's not there anymore. He's gone. He's entirely incompetent. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. He shouldn't be involved in any of this in the first place. If you were on the Maps Canada list, email list, guess what? Mark Hayden just took your emails and started promoting his company to that. He emailed me. I never signed up for whatever his fucking bullshit company was, but I started getting his emails. It took Psymposia to raise that issue with Scott Bernstein for Scott to issue a notice to people who entrusted Maps Canada with their privacy. It took Psymposia to inform them of this breach in privacy, for Maps Canada to notify their email list that their emails were illegally taken. It's illegal in Canada. That's illegal. The penalties are actually absurd. The financial penalties that come with doing what Mark Hayden did. Scott Bernstein, I don't really want to get into this, but it pisses me off. Like, you cannot believe that in response to this, Scott Bernstein threatened one of our sources for this story. He threatened to dox a source. This is an organization that you are supposed to put your trust in. You're supposed to put your trust in this organization to take care of your privacy, to give you drugs. This is how the leadership at Maps Canada behaves. One fucking guy steals all the emails and the other guy's threatening our sources. This is an incompetent organization. This organization shouldn't even exist anymore, in my opinion. And then when you raise the issue with everyone, all the yes men at Maps, all they say is, "Oh, separate organization. I don't know what to do about this. They're a separate organization, completely different organizational structure." These people fucking suck. Sorry, you got Normie unmasked a little bit there, but I'm so tired of this fucking incompetent leadership, not only at Maps USA, but this totally incompetent leadership at Maps Canada. I emailed them when that happened. This source was panicked that Maps Canada was threatening to dox them publicly. I woke up to reading an email about that. I have emailed the entire Maps Canada board, Rick Doblin, Betty Allworth. I emailed them back at the beginning of November. I waited a couple weeks, no response. I emailed them again, no response. I emailed them, I don't know, a few weeks ago, no response. No response. No one at Maps Canada wants any. You want to know how Maps behaves in these clinical trials? Look at how they behaved when their executive director threatens to dox a source of ours. This is just how they act. No accountability. No one has sent an email even acknowledging it. No one has sent an apology about it. Nothing. Zero. Didn't happen.
So we've talked, I think, on the last episode about some of the social connections between people, and Mark Hayden's an interesting one because he pops up on Martin Ball's podcast. And Hayden published this paper a while back that left me scratching my head, dealing with macrodosing LSD and people taking pretty ridiculously huge doses of, like, I think in at least one case, crystalline LSD, which, raises questions, right? Because it's not like
common, easy to come by.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I was curious, and I listened to Mark Hayden talking about the Goop Lab and macrodosing LSD. And, security culture is a thing that I think most people would acknowledge is important for people who are members of criminalized subcultures. But I guess Mark Hayden feels a little bit differently. And he kind of outs himself on that podcast as having connections to people who are in the sort of circles that have access to those kinds of doses. And, to my mind, that raises immediate questions about supply chains and chemists and the whole nine. And when I consider the way that people have insulated or explained him as this perpetual bumbler or this, that, and the other, like, I have to say, like seeing some of the hints, his brother also met an untimely death, according to an article, as a result of a botched synthesis. But like when I see some of the connections that are on the record about Mark Hayden in the broader community, and knowing that we have these above ground and underground communities, I have to wonder, some of the reticence to offer consequences. Like, I have to wonder about the reticence to suggest that there should be consequences for people's actions, and what is making people resistant, and why it's so hard to get engagement with clearly unethical behavior. And like,
I just want to point out that the tirade that I just went on, that was about the current executive director, Scott Bernstein. He took over from Mark Hayden. The first thing that he did essentially at the organization was threaten to dox our source and
cover for Mark Hayden.
And for people who might not think that's like super serious, if you are a source of, we have so many like sources all over the place. Okay, people trust us to give information to us. By the way, just to remind everyone, like, drugs are very illegal. Does people's
is criminalization a thing? Are we prohibition? Is that real?
People's careers, everything. Okay, people trust us with information. Just imagine, like, you spoke to Psymposia and you had the trust in us. We're going to advocate on your behalf, and MAPS actually sends you an email saying that they're going to release your name publicly, that you spoke to us. That's what happened.
So, I mean, I know we're getting close to needing to close, but I don't know. Okay. Lily, did you want to...
Oh, I guess a thought that I had that I wanted to circle back to was just with regards to this murmur I've heard of, like, that we are aggressive. I think it's worth recognizing, like, people are actively hurting other people. I would describe that as aggressive and violent, and resistance and self-defense are not the same as trying to harm people. And frankly, like, I don't understand why drawing attention to this issue or seeking accountability for these harms feels like such a fight.
People with a lot of power don't want to lose it.
I mean, people have a lot of investments in the space.
They'll do anything to keep their power and their status and their position as fucking gods in this space. The gods who give the drugs.
And it does put a crack in the facade that if you drop the ball about trauma, when your whole brand is healing trauma, that might elicit, well, pretty much what we're asking for, which is a little bit of soul searching, some reassessment, perhaps even some shakeup of personnel, or maybe just stop what it is that you're doing that is causing distress in others.
Yeah, if you've got your foot on someone's neck and they're screaming for you to stop, they're not the aggressor.
Sorry, I get super fired up with the doxing.
No, it's fucked up. Don't apologize.
You're so aggressive.
I just, like, that's just, to me, that, like, that is one thing. Don't go there. Don't go there, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go there. And like, I'm not going to get into it anymore. Just
the
don't go there.
the level.
It's like, to me, that's like a top offense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he didn't even
The level of
realize the full
trust
extent
that-
of how fucked up that would have been. Like
Yeah.
Mhm.
He got mad for a minute and just thought he was gonna fucking bully someone.
I know.
If
Well, that's like
Psymposia
the
didn't go
ignorance
to
in an
bat,
executive position.
if Psymposia
Sorry.
didn't raise a stink as it currently is about this bullying behavior, what are we doing? We're a watchdog. Like,
Woof.
Watch
woof.
this dog.
There it is.
Sorry, all credit on that to Pace.
I've been sitting on that for a while.
I am the wolf. I am the wolf.
Look,
We're
we're just here for
to
the
the
hits.
point about aggression and about that. I saw someone also say whenever we're challenged, we get defensive. I thought that was kind of silly too, because it's like you came out of nowhere and like I don't know, brought something up that we didn't agree with and what clearly wouldn't have agreed with, and then when we like respond to it, that's defensive. I don't understand that.
Yeah. No.
Take
for instance, like the way in which, I mean, because of the huge platform that New York Mag brought these topics, there's a lot of people commenting at this point across multiple platforms, and some of the things that are being said are pretty outlandish. But I'd say the most outlandish thing came out just before we started recording, really, where someone said something to the effect of, like, I might be a little tinfoil hat here, but I think that maybe Psymposia might be some prohibitionists in disguise here, trying to tank the movement. And it's like, all right, cool.
That's exactly
This is the same
why
person
I
who
spent-
went, I invite Psymposia to come dose me up with pure LS or pure MDMA and get me to try to have sex with them. I guarantee my resolve will be
totally
okay, and I won't do it. It's like, dude, you're either totally misunderstanding what the information we put out, or like willfully misrepresenting that.
This is a person who seemed like that they
That's a totally
kind of
healthy, normal response.
This is a person who thought that whatever his name is, Adeptus Psychonautica, Rob.
Oh no, we're talking about two different.
This wasn't
some of his fanboys.
This was one of his fanboys. This was one of the people who thought that he was a good source of information. So like, I'm not surprised.
I'm starting to see also, like, every now and again this allegation that we're like funded by pharma to like do bad on the psychedelic party.
We're
and
not
the thing
funded by
is,
anyone.
we're not. And like, God, if that's the case, like, where's the money? I don't see it. I mean, I don't want it, but it would upset me if like somehow that were the case, and I just didn't. Where's my money?
Also, like I'm curious what the theories are about, like, why I spent so much time over so many years trying to help people learn to extract and grow their own. And like,
it was a long game.
It was a long con that pays off in.
I was I was busted. I was facing like 20 years in prison for doing stuff. I think I don't think I'm pro prohibition. Like
prohibition.
I mean, I was gonna. All right, we're good.
Can we stop recording there? Is that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
When the jokes get to that stage, it's well. Thanks for coming along on this
Shamanic
power
healing
trip.
journey.
And at some point we'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming, but we do have a few things that we'd like to wade into that are sort of tied to this, so that those will probably come at some point, well, hopefully. And we'll catch y'all on the next one.
The healing journey isn't always easy.
Oh boy.
Oh, buddy.